Hi, Perfume Nation. Welcome to the next installment of friendly, casual, conversational learning. It's gonna be an interesting one. We are gonna finally break down how we smell, how that works, what are the components involved, and I'm gonna climb on the hill of bridging the perfume society and olfaction science that are rarely seen together in public. Yet one feeds into the another and back. A lot of olfaction scientists, neuroscientists, and chemists were inspired by their early memories of smell, including fragrances, flavors, food, and perfume. And in a less obvious fashion, the advances of organic chemistry and olfaction science opened the lid on so many more new products and way for us to enjoy and, let's face it, capitalize and make a coin out of the way we perceive the outer world through smells. And as I'm about to play the Perfume Nation anthem, I have a quick ask of you guys. If you're watching this episode or listening to it on any platform and you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. It really helps with the production and pitching of the show. So I really, really would appreciate if you did so and shared maybe on your favorite social media with friends or people who you think would benefit from this information. And as you're listening to the tune, clicking on those lovely buttons and leaving a welcoming comment, I am gonna also take time and spray my fragrance for today's discussion, which is gonna be a honeyed soft leather. Soft leather is the note of the year for 2024, and mine is coming from French niche brand L'Artisan Parfumeur Mon Numero 10. I have to my 30 ml bottle and seriously am considering a replacement for it because I don't see it in the main lineup. I might be wrong, but I don't want to live without it. So pull your favorite leather from your fragrance collection, stretch those fingers, click on those buttons, and I'll see you in a flash.
Welcome to the show. Grab a seat, take it slow. You tune just in time to join the flow. Welcome to the hype where sense come alive, where knowledge and laughter find side by side. Perfume Nation is the place where we dive, exploring the scents and the stories they drive. We're glad that you came, just jump in the game, where we unveil secrets behind fragrance's fame. Welcome to Perfume Nation, we're glad you are here. Join our journey, lend us your ear. So let's start the show, give us a cheer. Welcome to Perfume Nation, we're glad you are here.
All right. I have been preparing, and this is only a small part of my book collection on fragrance. And let me tell you, the more you read, the more you dive into various olfaction resources, and I've been through a fair share, probably now dozens and dozens of nature reviews, neuroscience reviews, different papers on different subjects. I even started some discussions with olfaction scientists. Hopefully I'll be able to bring one or two out of the woods to answer our burning questions, and we will definitely do some myth busting when it comes to how we smell, how we memorize the smell, how it really works, what makes the most attractive or the most repelling fragrance, the subjectivity of it. All of that is in the making. It's just, again, as long as you're subscribed, you'll get to see it. You'll get to see it fairly soon. But I think it's fair to establish a common ground before we start actually diving into nitty-gritty details or reason about kind of the edges of that landscape. When it comes to the way we smell, surprisingly little is well established in the public sphere. You open any review on the subject, and again, like I went through dozens of them, so you don't have to. So here's what you're very likely to find in any kind of videos, courses, books, you name it. The discussion usually centers about the core basics that is useful to know, but in my personal opinion is not as transformative to how you apply that knowledge. However, let's go through the basic. How do we smell? Smell, also called olfaction, and you can see that there's like olfactory, olfactive, that all is referring to the systems, the sense of smell. We keep rediscovering this insight is that we more smell than we taste, and as big as in vivacious is the food and drinks industry, roughly like over 0.5% of what we taste is what we smell. We only have 4 types of taste receptors, and we have roughly 300, so hundreds of smell receptors that also combine in very complex fashion when it comes to recognizing or remembering or perceiving, experiencing composite odors that surround us all day long. Tasting is mostly smelling. There's some tasting, only 4 types of taste, and there is also kind of haptic, like mechanical feeling for food, but I'll save that for the episode when we talk about the flavor, the smelling, the flavors, and how it actually affects our metabolism and all that good stuff. So generally speaking, all animals do chemical sensing, and that chemical sensing, when one molecule binds to another and there is some kind of processing by a live organism of a bound agent, chemical sensing is a larger sphere to which olfaction belongs. So the aroma agents, those aromatic molecules, have to achieve a certain level of penetration, and depends. If you're fish, you're smelling in the water. If you're human, you're actually not smelling from the air, as a lot of people think. You're smelling through a thin layer of liquid that's called mucus, largely. And that layer of mucus is up there in our nose. You probably have noticed when you have a cold, or if you've cried, if you have a stuffy nose through allergies, it really changes your perception of smell. It's because the way we sniff and thickness and chemical composition of our mucus is very important to everything that happens afterward. So we sniff. There's a lot to be said about breathwork sniffing, and there will be episode on breathing, because it also affects not only the way we smell, but pretty much how we feel about everything. We sniff. Eventually the molecules, those that can bind into that kind of liquid layer, they penetrate the mucus. There is some chemical reactions that happen there. We actually have a power to deactivate smells even on that level. And the interesting and the most fascinating part that keeps researchers and practitioners on their toes is that the thing that smells is directly connected to our brain. All other senses have a number of kind of layers of separation from our brain, and often it's counted in how many synapses away are you from the center of the processing center of the brain. The olfaction, so far, as much as we know, is the least of 2 synapses away of directly affecting our limbic system. It's all our emotions and our flight or fight response, our primal nature that kind of drives us subconsciously, and our memory part of the brain. Just 2. The neurons that have their like sound, by the way, sound effects are free, guys, you're welcome. Those little neuron fingers, they are suspended in that mucus layer, and the more agents, the more aroma molecules arrive, the more they bind, and eventually it's really intricate, interesting system. Those neurons start signaling. The more they observe those aroma molecules in your mucus, the stronger is the signal. There is like a whole another layer of mystery of many to many, how exactly that signaling is done, what activated. It's not linear, it's not like 1 or 0. There is like a lot of interesting watercolory complexity there. But all in all, these little things, these are neurons. That's already considered part of the brain, because the next destination for them is straight into glomeruli, these kind of communities of the other ends of the neuron inside the brain in an organ called olfaction bulb, because it kind of looks like a bulb. So those signals are happening. They are grouped more or less, depends on an animal. In our case, in human case, they are semi-grouped by type of, I wouldn't say smells, but the subtype of molecules, the subtype of smells. So there's kind of like these little balls that are nested in that little package, in that little pouch. There is signaling there, and once that transformation happens, then there is little dangling other neurons that go straight, yes, to the limbic system, to hippocampus, and to, as we keep discovering, they involved in many other types of reactions and functions. That put aside, let's talk about memory a little bit. The more I dive into the different professional accounts of how olfaction works and how the different industries think about it, the more I get confused about what's true and what's not. And here is a potentially controversial disclaimer, but I'm gonna say it because I've invested a lot of my brain power and time into making sense of these things, and I'm discovering a bit of it's not a conspiracy theory, but a bit of a sad fact. It's becoming more and more of a fact in my analysis. There are a lot of directly contradictory multiple studies when it comes to how we memorize smells, how we discern them, how they affect our memory. And one of the key reasons I find these controversies is because a lot of their published research on olfaction in certain decades, like I would say 70s to early 2000s, came from psychology departments. The graph that shows reproducibility of scientific insights, well, I'm trying to remember, it's between 60 to 90% of papers from psychology departments are not reproducible. A lot of that work is also done with extremely low counts of subjects if they're done on humans, and that's very important for drawing conclusions, whether you had a diary study with 5, 10, 30 people, or if you conducted rigorous statistical testing with 30,000. Also, papers that don't involve neuroscience or chemistry departments assistance in the way that they propose any kind of mechanism, how something works, often just make wild projections and hypothesizing instead of actually measuring and proving with controls any viable existing pathway of how such thing would work. And yet there are so many papers of this kind that 3 of lifetimes for me would not be enough to really dive deep, reach out to every author and figure out what really happened and what didn't. So what often is done in cases like that, and that's what I'm gonna go by, is common sense. If you see that the same result keeps presenting itself, no matter who presents it, a professor of psychology, a professor of neuroscience, already better, experimental lab on organic chemistry, even better, unless they're sponsored by a corporation that sells a product based on their insights. That also becomes a little bit of a question, and here it's like hint pheromone research. Anyway, I am going by kind of meta-analysis. If over several decades, these type of researchers, those kind of stumbled upon the same common ground, foundational mechanism or insight, I tend to believe that until, an amount of evidence comes forward that debunks it and presents a better explanation of why things work a certain way. There's been a lot of PR for the sense of smell in literature. Actually, less than I would expect so, but it seems that describing scents is a fairly new literary genre that mostly we started enjoying in 20th century, a little bit of the 19th century, but much less so. So the beauty and the art of smelling something and being affected by it, no matter how, was a very experiential thing. And I guess similarly to literature on what's the best way to work out, what's the best way to stretch, what's the best way to grow muscle, the literature of this kind is only really is being written now, or at least in the past century. So there's more exciting stuff to come, and we will revisit the subject when we have more data. Therefore, I was mostly looking at the most recent reviews, because these things move very fast. Literary genre of talking about perfumery was kind of like the first spotlight where we can see scents being linked with memory. It's also, I dare say, not necessarily invention of Proust or the archivists that studied Wagner. It's also, in a way, common sense. We all have had that experience at least once when a suddenly perceived scent brings feelings and sometimes vivid, colorful memories of people, places, events in our lives that we thought were far gone. I would agree with Avery Gilbert in this really cool book. And I have mine from the library because I love the library. What the Nose Knows, that it's a bit exaggerated when it comes to literature. Probably it is fair to say that smelling is not an ideal 100% perfect memory. After all, in the stack ranking of how we make decisions in the moment, unless some smells are hard-coded to us as kind of survival threat, the sense of smell plays definitely not the first role. The first role in immediate decision-making is usually vision, then auditory, and then everything else. However, in recall, people differ. Some people better remember sounds, some people better remember images, some people kind of remember by motoric, so we would say haptic response. And the only thing that unifies us in this kind of odd heterogeneous way, there are some smells that are unique to each person that can evoke very powerful instant memories. It's almost like a Pavlovian instinct. And when it's a traumatic memory, for example, it's been studied throughout the history of wars that a large part of PTSD of soldiers that came back from the wars where you had to do kind of on the ground combat is that the smell of smoke and burning meat, for understandable reasons, were strong triggers of panic attacks and episodes of severe triggers of the PTSD response. So to rewrite a learned reaction to a particular smell is actually a fairly daunting task. Can be done, but not that easy. Also, and I guess it probably makes sense for those of you who kind of believe, who side with evolutionary biology arguments or thinking of that kind, in the survivalist view, it seems that we code bad scents much faster and much more reliably that we remember good scents. So we have this often like uncertain pleasantness of an odor, and then it may or may not evoke any given feeling. But when it is a bad memory, traumatic memory, like you got sick from a specific type of meal or cheese or something that had taste and a smell, the moment you smell that, you just, nope, not gonna eat that. Some people don't eat, I don't know, certain types of fish or certain types of vegetables, certain types of meals all their life because they had a severe poisoning accident in their youth. The only part that is very hard to commercialize is that it's individual. So in a podcast like this, we can all share our favorite or not so favorite memories and scents that just like, oh my God, as soon as I smell this, I know. But you can't really monetize on that. At least nobody came up with a universal business scheme yet. The only useful discussions of that kind in more of a consumer products category is how to identify the key signature perfumes of our mothers and fathers era and avoid them in dating, because you don't want your romantic interest to think of their father, mother, grandmother, or grandfather when you're hoping, to win their affection. This is also a good argument against buying popular scents or buying scents in mainstream stores. Because if everybody smells like that, you're nameless. And again, if we're talking about sexy perfumes and how to leave a lasting impression, your lasting impression has to be unique enough that you separate yourself from an average smell of a, subway car at 5 p.m. when everybody gets off work, or a bar at 11 p.m. Therefore, uniqueness, and yet a uniqueness but pleasantness, kind of friendliness of a fragrance, this very odd combination that we all are looking to find in order to make something ours, that is like a forever cat and mouse game that perfumers play. Not all perfumes are like that. Some things are just for us. They are like landscapes, olfactory landscapes that we go through. They send us to imaginary worlds or to certain places in our memory. And some things are just simply pleasant, and that's good enough. But here, that's where this book was very instrumental for me to kind of not to oversubscribe to this point of view. Here where a very useful criticism emerges. If our ability to be remembered and to be distinguished and to remember smells were that unique and that universal, then it would absolutely withstand the test of convoluting signals. For example, there is a big selling point in aromatherapy. If lavender, like it's a famous example, lavender is thought to be nearly, at this point, from the people that I talk to sometimes, people think it's nearly genetically encoded to calm us down. Not really, it turns out. It's more like a cultural encoding. There were tests that were performed with people when they were played a cheerful, very uplifting, or even nauseating kind of like high energy music, and were presented with lavender smell. And people who were presented with absolutely no auditory cues and were presented with a lavender scent. People who were presented with a neutral scent and were told it's lavender. And people who were presented with a calming music and were presented with a lavender scent. There's probably an infinite number of factorial analysis we can do there, but the short story is that if you present conflicting scenarios, such as uplifting or disturbingly energetic music, plus lavender, it somehow magically ceases to work, doesn't calm anybody down. If you present just a lavender scent and people recognize it as lavender, it tends to calm people down. Interestingly, if there is no real scent, but you just give like, I don't know, a wet cotton pad and say like, this is just, there are traces of lavender essential oil here. And people do have a concept that lavender scent is calming. It also works. 101 proof of placebo. So if we believe that we're smelling something, depending of what we are told we're smelling, something calming, or there were tests done with dangerous or unpleasant smells where people would start smelling things by coercion, even though they were giving just a wet cloth, just like with water, with no discernible smells. So we're very suggestible to what we're smelling if we're smelling something or not smelling anything at all. Similarly, there were studies with substituting apple and orange juice and kind of presenting them in the same color with just the food dyes, and people would think they were drinking orange juice even though they were drinking and smelling apple juice. So we both have strong memory of certain scents, predominantly bad ones. If it was a bad outcome, it's in neuroscience and now in machine learning, it's called one-shot learning. You only need to experience something once, and you remember it forever, so to speak. It's a very rare occasion. Through all these case studies and research that kind of dives deeper into how exactly does that happen and does not, it sometimes happens for certain things, and those are usually very different for different people. It has to be encoded with a time and place and a feeling. That's first. Second of all, when we talk about just our general ability to tell A from B, B from C, kind of in the moment, we really suck at that. And here where more literary accounts of how olfaction works really differ depending on the sentiment of the author of the book. One presenter will say, well, we can tell a difference in a smell if it only differs by one atom or just one chirality of a bond. And it's not untrue. There are molecules that, if you look at their chemical structure, are nearly identical. Nearly. Yet when animals, including us, are exposed to these, to sniff, if they're safe to, we do experience a different smell. That is true. However, there is even wider army of odors that we really struggle to tell apart by themselves and are absolutely useless to discern and tell apart if there is any kind of conditional coercion or other signals present, because those will override what you think you're smelling or actually are smelling. Depressing, I know. Here we are, all gathered together to stroke our ego and potentially get better at being the connoisseurs of fragrances. But I think it helps to place ourselves at the roots of reality and facts as we know them now, before we either judge ourselves or others too harshly. Even more magic happens with mothers learning to identify their babies by smell within the first week of their existence in the outside world. It's known, and I got it from this wonderful book by Matthew Cobb, A Smell, A Very Short Introduction. Highly recommend. It's a small pocket-sized book that contains plethora of meta-analysis and anecdotes when it comes to smell. There are many really fun, interesting, centuries-long practices that take that associative, quick memorization into account. And I highly recommend you check some of them out in the book Smell, a Very Short Introduction by Michael Cobb. I am thinking we should probably get him on the podcast. What do you think? And one that I don't know, kind of was adorable, because we do know babies do magic on our sense of smell. Like, there's been now a number of studies that shows that babies are apparently like a chemistry attack on everybody's noses, and whatever they are emitting is making us like them a lot. Survivalism, huh? Similar thing exists with sheep, interestingly. So here's the account. A similarly strong form of learning occurs in animals such as sheep, where the mother rapidly learns the smell of its offspring and will reject any other animals or lambs from suckling. And what the shepherds do if they have an orphaned lamb is a sheep lost its offspring, it's stillborn or something happened, they will put a small piece of skin of the dead offspring next to the orphan lamb, and the sheep, by smelling that around the new kind of placed in lamb, will learn to accept the lamb as her own. So the mother will start feeding that lamb and will accept him as her own. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's truly miraculous, right? How this learning works when it's needed for survivalist purposes. Even more fascinating part of remembering smells and orienting ourselves around them in this beautiful animal kingdom that we live in is navigation. Not only in birds, mind you, or insects that can smell food or can smell a mate. Birds associate smells with water, with land, and they navigate around the globe. In humans too. It's poorly understood right now why and what for, but interestingly, the spatial part of the brain, the spatial mapping parts of our brain are interacting, and I don't want to overstate that they're co-located, but they're definitely interactions and co-processing of spatial signals, our navigation, our mapping of space, and smells. Even though we're not migrating birds, somehow ecologically it is high level functionality is preserved. This I can't quite put my finger on it, but like it just started a chain of thinking for me that I still need to mull it over. There's something there that is just rings true, and yet I can't quite put my finger on it. If you have any impressions or stories how spatial thinking, navigation, maps, and smells, how it manifests in your life, please share in the comments down below. I find this is not discussed nearly enough, and yet our spatial mapping ability is nearly half of our ability to make sense of patterns, memorize things. It's pretty much the same functionality that is used in major career paths: problem solving, remembering math, not remembering functioning with mathematical terms. All natural sciences are very strongly reliant on our spatial mapping parts of functionality in the brain. So the fact that olfaction is very strongly linked to it, well, I guess maybe, just maybe, all of us are just a little bit of a mathematical geniuses. If we love perfume, it's just we haven't tapped into that superpower yet. Could it be? Could it be? I don't know, but rings true to me. And here we got to the meat of it. The importance of what we're about to discuss just cannot be overstated. The neurons, the olfactory neurons, that are not stimulated at all, or in certain cases are severely overstimulated, tend to die. Next piece of data, the olfaction by many, and I say many, research studies, hospital studies, hundreds of thousands of case studies. The earliest, and sometimes the earliest, I mean years in advance, the earliest onset of dementia and Alzheimer's is the loss of smell or the loss of interest in smell. There is almost nothing else that was found so far in the science of aging and this general wellness that would have such high stable correlation and such early sign as a risk factor. So I dare say, if you are into smelling of anything, maybe you're into coffee, maybe you're into wine, maybe you're into food, maybe you're foodie, maybe you're into perfumes, keep it up. Don't give up. Just don't overstimulate yourself, because again, as I said in the first part of this, overstimulation of olfactory neurons causes them to die. Much less so that absence of stimulation, but it does happen. And there is also such a thing as olfactory adaptation, receptor adaptation, where the more of something, a constant aromatic signal that you add, and the higher that it is, the more your whole organism, there will be enzymes that will be breaking those molecules down in the mucus so they stop bothering the receptors. There will be redistribution and reactivation and deactivation of the signaling receptors on the level of glomeruli, and then consecutively in the brain itself. So the brain will start shutting down any strong constant scent. So for those of you, for those who love to bake in their Ventus Creed, Ambrexan, or Baccarat Rouge, or you name it, got bad news for you. It's like insisting that overspraying or making perfumes even stronger, even longer lasting, and even more and more, it's kind of akin for a more morbidly obese person insisting on more saturated fat, sugar, and carbohydrates in their diet, and larger portions of that, and claiming that has nothing to do with them not being able to taste anything or not enjoying their health. It is nearly the same, tragically, with olfaction. The stronger the perfumes are in your perfume library, in your regimen, or if you only use one to that end, bad news. We need to diversify. We need to create dynamic smelling experiences for us. And if you want to learn more about that, there is an interview with Sam Macer, who is a perfumer. And we talked about the kind of more science-based and more viable paths to enjoy perfumes that you have that would not damage your nose, and will not damage your friendships and family relationships if you chronically overapply anything. So we need to figure out how to create dynamic smelling experiences where we can have something come and go away, and something that changes through time, certain diversity of components that we surround ourselves with, and carefully monitor that we're not oversaturating our receptors, because that can actually damage your sense of smell. And as I said, the scariest part of it all, that I feel like there should be, like a weekly reminders from, I don't know, the control center of disease, I don't know, from every physician's visit that we have. Because if loss of sense of smell can predict our untimely loss of memory, cognitive abilities, and our pretty much bodily autonomy as adults, as as independent people, having a job, having a life, having our autonomy, by developing dementia and Alzheimer's, like everybody should be involved in developing our senses of smell through whatever means you can. And it doesn't have to be perfumes, but if it is, you're welcome. Send this episode to your friends and family. Let them subscribe and learn together with you. It just sounds alarming if years in advance you can know what's coming. Crazy. Yes, there are like some other things that can affect the way we smell. Virus infections that can do or do not necessarily yield serious degradation of memory, but arguably the loss of sense of smell also but is highly correlated with depression, mind you. There, I find the argument is a little harder to make. We need to wait for more data to come from proper medical research or neurocognitive research, and not kind of just case studies, because depression the overall depressive state that is experienced by our body, our brain, leads to suppression of a lot of feelings and a lot of bodily functions. So it's not clear to me, is it the result of the depression or is it something that can lead to depression? Though some of the long COVID research that's becoming available is sort of lightly suggestive that the loss of smell, given, and this is where it's iffy, given the full restoration of health otherwise, which I kind of struggle to believe in. If you have long COVID, you have more problems than one. But tentatively, the loss of smell is associated, the progressive loss of smell, like the less you smell, the heavier is your depressive state. That's, I think, the argument that is now being made. But let's wait for more kind of a causal confirmation, because right now it seems like chicken and egg kind of question. Depression probably dulls all of our senses and emotions, but whether the loss of smell by itself can depress you, I guess it could, because you can't really taste your food anymore if you can't smell it. So I can see that. I can see that, but not convinced yet. After such a delightful dive that we just had with what we think we know about how we smell, how it works, why it's such an important part of our experience being alive. And I guess let's to throw one more, because this one is worth repeating. Over a third of our genome is devoted to olfaction in terms of genetic coding. That is no small percentage, guys. Over a third of the whole human genome is olfaction genes, olfaction related. That's pretty big deal, and yet there's no clear explanation to why. I'm thrilled to see that neuroscience departments are teaming up with cognitive psychology, statistics, and organic chemistry departments in order to kind of bring a more cohesive studies into the light, to make them happen, because this is such a complex yet important part of what makes not just us human, makes the life on Earth what it is, that I don't think we can afford to waste any more decades to a siloed, subjectively driven, not properly peer-reviewed, not statistical viable research. I think this is the time of hyper-large collaboration in the olfaction science, hopefully supported, sponsored, and celebrated by the commercial world of fragrance and flavoring. I am like holding my fingers crossed for more foundational understanding to come forward very soon. That said, to make it a full circle, here are just a few fragrances that are I either happened to be olfactory anchors, as I call them, or I chose them to be. And I want to show them a few just to inspire you to think about your life as it was and as it is now, because you are forming memory anchors at this very moment. What do you want to remember about this time now? You know, the summer of 2024. How do you want to remember it? Choose your anchors carefully. So here's a few of mine. The Prussian, the most mysterious and vague and strong in feeling, is Calèche Eau Délicate by Hermès for me. To me, it smells like childhood, something in my early childhood, like something about my grandma even. But I can't tell what it is because this is a complex, soft floral. Doesn't have much in common with the original Calèche Eau de Parfum, at least in my view. It's such a unique, nuanced scent. I've tried and tried and tried to replace with something else. Nothing comes close. There is some nuanced complexity here that just delivers this feeling of being 5 years old for me, and nothing else does. Discontinued, very hard to find. I only have one more replacement, and that's probably gonna be it unless Hermès does us all a favor and brings it back. I would even argue it's worth making it its own character in the Hermesons. My flamboyant, rebellious youth, Jasmine et Cigarette by Tat Libre d'Orange. Light, slightly metallic jasmine flowers, you know, the ones that kind of like a high vibration. They are very light, they're floaty. And wet cigarette buds. That's my high school in a nutshell. Then, sure, lilacs. I was probably the happiest person on YouTube when lilacs officially became named as one of the top notes of 2024. And rightfully so. I can't find a flower that's more universally nostalgic and romantic and kind of symbolizes this beauty, symbiosis of our youth, nature, hopes. I don't know a single person who hates lilacs. Yes, if the worst teacher you had in school wore a lilac perfume, yeah, probably it got anchored pretty tragically in your memory. Otherwise, everybody loves lilacs. It's like lavender, a universally coded, romantic, pure, slightly naive, hopeful scent. So the best and the cheapest that I can find in the States is Pacifica French Lilac. Though the search continues, I shall be trying more lilacs. The most beautiful oil painting of a citrus is Jean-Claude Elena creation for Frederic Malle Bigarade Concentré. My first full-size bottle purchase from Frederic Malle, because this is just genius. Jean-Claude Elena has made many citrusy perfumes in his career. A lot of them are glorious, famous, cult favorites, but in my view, he outdid himself here. This is the citrus of them all. It has everything. It's almost like a purse made of thick green leaves that are soaked in lime, lemon, you name it. Beautiful. Anchored for me in my strive. Like, I made some big jump in my career in AI back in the day. Got my own lab, started hiring the team. It felt like a very fresh and new beginning. And I also at the time but kind of were relocating within Florida. and was trying to accommodate to its like hot, wet climate. It's just mercilessly muggy in the summer. And Biggerad Concentrate is what kept me going with so much good and not so good change, so many things that were I needed to adapt to very quickly without losing my focus and my energy levels. So Biggerad Concentrate is firmly for me associated with this kind of like new beginning, powering through something. Such a beautiful citrus, guys. Yep. I hope you enjoyed this little memory museum of mine. I will be not so patiently waiting for your stories. What are your scent anchors? What kind of things you can always bring your memories forward to if you smell them in now? And if you want to play this game, let's exchange ideas for how to anchor summer of 2024. What shall we call our olfactory memories for our future selves? What our future selves will thank us for if we form these associations now? I'll be waiting for your comments. Thank you so much for being me with this episode of Perfume Nation. Please like and subscribe. I'll give you a snazzy outro. So while you're listening to this tune, stretch your fingers, type your comments, no rush, click on those buttons. Please subscribe and support the growth of this podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Hey there, you've reached the end, but don't just depart. Hit like, subscribe, it's a way to take part. Your support, your love, it's an art. Together we grow, play our part in this job. It's more than a click, it's a bridge, a connection, a way to sustain. To fuel this direction, each like, each sub. Show perfection, we're in this together, seeking perfection. Like and subscribe, be the vibe, keep us alive. In this digital sea, it's how we thrive. Your support is the core, the drive. In this world of content, we're the prototype. Donations, contributions that keep the lights on. Fueling our passion from dusk till dawn. It's not just content, it's a bond that's strong.